Welcome back, everyone. This is Ed Morgan. It's day 5 of our virtual traverse of Alaskan forestry. And I want to start out by thanking again our host and our speakers from yesterday, Mitch Michaud, and then our speakers, Jason Moan and Nathan Lejeski, who was pinch hitting for Clay Hoyt. We've got a pretty full schedule today, so I am going to turn the meeting over to our host for today, Dan Reese. He's the chair of the Yukon River chapter. So Dan, take it away.
All right, let me share our generic screenshot here I had on earlier. So my name's Dan Reese. I'm the chapter chair of the Yukon River chapter. And on our Alaska map there, I did a broad circle of what that is, but we also dip a little south into the Kuskokwim River area, McGrath, so southwest Alaska. The Yukon River chapter has approximately 20 members. We represent interior Alaska, which is basically defined Alaska Range to the south, the Brooks Range to the north, Canadian border on the east, and then where tree line kind of fades out towards the Bering Coast there. We're a continental climate, so characterized by cold winters and warm summers. Cold winters we're kind of well known for. We are definitely boreal forest. We have 6 tree species that are native. Our productivity on the landscape is basically limited by cold soils. We're a disturbance-driven system, as boreal forests tend to be. We're known for large wildfires. We're prone to large insect outbreaks, and flooding events along our major rivers definitely affect our forests. The forest industry in interior Alaska, basically since people have occupied these lands, has largely been to support people that live on the lands. So mostly fuel wood, house logs, and some sawn materials. On average, probably across interior Alaska, about 1,000 acres is cut per year. And it's a quite large area, so that's not a lot. The second largest mill in Alaska is located in Fairbanks, which is in interior Alaska. And that mill produces roughly 2 million board feet a year, most of which is used locally in the region. As I mentioned, fire is a major disturbance event. The state of Alaska has between 600,000 and 1.2 million acres burned annually. Most of that occurs in interior Alaska. Fire management in Alaska largely focuses on community protection and values at risk. And then with that, there's a lot of focus on communities and wildfire fuels reduction around those communities to reduce threat. And that's what brings us to our talk today. We'll have a couple speakers addressing land management, and then a couple speakers addressing current research on wildfire fuel management. So we'll start off with Will Putnam. He is the forestry director at Tanana Chiefs Conference. He's in Fairbanks, Alaska. Tanana Chiefs is a nonprofit tribal organization that serves interior Alaska, or the Doyon region, which is our for-profit regional native corporation. And then after Will speaks, we'll have Darren Finley speaking. Darren's filling in for Jeremy Dowse, who had a family emergency. Jeremy is the Northern Regional Forester for the State Division of Forestry. Darren is the Division of Forestry statewide fuels coordinator. I guess he started that job about a month ago, and Jeremy handed this talk off to him a day ago. So thanks, Darren, for filling in on that. After Will and Darren speak, we'll have some questions and answers till about 12:45, and then I'll stop that, and we'll have some folks talk on wildfire research. So I'll stop sharing my picture of a typical interior Alaska October day where you can see all of our tree species and lowlands and uplands, and turn it over to Will.
Try sharing the screen here. Which one? Are we seeing things there properly?
Yes, good.
Excellent. Okay. Well, my name is Will Putman. As Dan mentioned, I'm the forestry director here at TANACROSS Chiefs Conference. We're a tribally based organization in Fairbanks and serving a lot of tribes, 42 tribes in interior Alaska. The extent of the region that we serve pretty much almost defines interior Alaska. I first came to interior Alaska, almost hate to admit how long ago it was, but it was 42 years ago. I was a forestry student in Montana coming north for a summer job to work on forest inventory. And my immediate supervisor was Ken Winterberger, and his supervisor was Jim LeBeau, and I think both those guys are on the call here today. So anytime I start to feel too much like an old codger, all I have to do is think about that, and it makes me feel better. I've had the pleasure of working with several other people that are on the call here today over the years, and it's been quite a good experience. A couple of years after that initial exposure to interior Alaska, I moved to Fairbanks to go to graduate school. And a couple of years after that, I started working for TANACROSS Chiefs Conference. The TCC, as an organization, we serve all the tribes in a very large region. I think it's almost the size of Montana. That's defined. It's also synonymous with the Doyon region, as defined by the Alaska Native Claims Settlement Act. There's the propaganda coming out of TCC says that we have 42 tribes. It kind of depends on, I'm not sure if they're all federally recognized or how many of them are actual functional units or not. But but you can sort of think of that we serve somewhere in the neighborhood of 35, 40 tribal communities scattered all over this very large region. And you look at where those communities are, and you can pretty much say that all of them are at some sort of risk from wildland fire. They're basically the outskirts of these communities. They're all small. They're all kind of defined to be wildland urban interface. And so we didn't really get into the fuels game until almost 20 years ago, 15, 20 years ago. And our first involvement with the fuels game was a project at TANACROSS that kicked off, I think, about 2003. It was a cooperative project that I think was instigated by the people at the village of TANACROSS, working with the BLM Alaska Fire Service, and they pulled in a number of other collaborators, the State Division of Forestry, ourselves, the TANACROSS Chiefs, and the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service. And they laid out and sent a fire crew in, I think, to work on doing the actual fuel reduction work, a shaded fuel break in several areas around the village. That work progressed from there to we TANACROSS Chiefs procured some BIA funding a year or two later and came in with a phase 2 where we expanded on and built on the acres that was done at TANACROSS on that. And so when we did that, there was a contract that we set up with the Bureau of Indian Affairs, and then we would turn right around and subcontract to the local tribal council, and they would hire the workers to work on the project. We would lay out a project, buy equipment, train the guys, and then the payroll and the directive on the ground administration was handled by the village, and then we would sort of oversee the whole project. And that sort of established a model for subsequent projects that we did for the years following that. In more recent years, we've kind of shifted from these village-based projects to doing fuels work on native allotments, which are the trust lands that the BIA's funding is more commonly directly pointed at. But and that is valuable, especially when you have structures and values at risk on these parcels. But the real worth and value, I think, of the direction of this funding and these projects, I think, is geared towards the direction or the protection of the communities, the villages themselves. So anyway, over the years after that initial project at TANACROSS, We visited, there was like 12 or 13 villages on that list, scattered all over the place. Our villages on the road system in the Tanana Valley were pretty, we kind of hit those pretty effectively. But and then there's a few other projects sort of scattered elsewhere, all around the region. And as you can see from this map, every village had its own unique situation. There was sometimes there was an existing community wildfire protection plan in place that we would follow. Sometimes there wasn't a plan in place, but we would work with the village to try to put a plan in place. A lot of times we just kind of did whatever kind of quick ad hoc planning was required to sort of get our project off the ground. And the funding source we were using allowed us to do that. I think it would be more common that you would be required to have some sort of more formal community wildfire planning process completed in order to justify the expenditure of money to do these projects. They always ended up working with multiple landowners around these projects, but primarily was with the local village corporation, sometimes native allotment owners, sometimes other private landowners in the area. Not too often were we dealing with an agency at that point in terms of their land. The projects were very small. We're talking the immediate vicinity of the village. It ranged from being just a couple acres around the landfill to more commonly we would be trying to bite off 20 or 30 acres in sort of strips around the village. Most of the treatments were shaded fuel breaks. Sometimes we did kind of cleared fuel breaks, but in the shaded breaks, we would remove or thin the trees and leave a number of residual trees behind. The residual trees that we would leave, we would favor the broadleaf species, birch, aspen, cottonwood. Any of the residual trees, especially spruce, if they were left behind, were pruned. All the slash and the fuel wood was kind of pulled into piles. We would try to arrange for the salvage of the available fuel wood for the local villagers as firewood. And some places, some of the trees got a little bigger and we would generate a fair bit of volume of that. The slash, sometimes in some areas, especially the upper Tanana, was kind of recognized that Ips bark beetles was a potential problem with the slash. So sometimes there would have to be some sort of mitigation of the slash to try to reduce the Ips habitat. We would have these conversations with Roger Burnside. We've heard some of that talk yesterday in terms of what might be required to sort of limit bark beetle habitat and down logs. And I'm not sure that what we were doing with the slash treatment on these projects was actually effective for limiting the Ips, but we would make a run at it to make that attempt. The slash would eventually be piled and eventually burned, usually the following fall or winter at a time of low fire danger. It was all hand labor on these projects. It was especially in the remote villages, you didn't have access to much available equipment. There's no like existing contractors with contracted equipment, contractable equipment kind of conveniently handy in most cases. And so it was all hand labor with chainsaws. We would end up buying and supplying these projects with chainsaws and parts and providing chainsaw training, provide PPE, shovels and blasties, and weed burner torches to help facilitate the burning of the piles. And quite expensive on these projects, really kind of embarrassingly expensive. We would try to get these things done at like several $1,000s an acre. And that worked sometimes when there were well-managed projects by a local crew boss or a local tribal administrator. And other times it was a real struggle sort of administering the project. And it was almost, later on, I remember Tom Paraguay was giving a presentation a couple of years ago at the university, and he threw out a cost of these hand labor type shaded fuel breaks down in the Kenai, more like approaching $10,000 an acre. And that made me feel a little bit better that we were trying to pull it off for $3,000 or $4,000 an acre. Whenever we tried to get some of this work done with an actually organized fire crew, that's when the clock would really start spinning wildly and the money would be getting spent and the cost per acre would kind of go up. I guess just because you had a larger crew and it's very difficult to be maybe very efficient on that. Of course, the cost varies wildly depending on what kind of fuel type you're in, whether it's heavy saw timber, which is the case in some cases. More commonly, it's small black spruce and brush, but often very thick and producing lots of slash, lots of labor. Producing lots of labor from our standpoint is not necessarily a bad thing because employment and local hiring is always a big issue with the remote villages that we're dealing with. And so pumping employment dollars into the community, you know, is viewed as a positive thing. There are basically, you know, 3 phases to these projects: the thinning or the clearing itself, the stacking of the slash, and the burning. As you can see from the one picture on the right, that was a burning of some shaded fuel break strips near Minto, and the smoke plume going up was what it was visible from the Minto airstrip. And you could see, I suppose in some cases we would need to be concerned about air quality and the timing and weather dispersal of particulates and all that sort of thing. One would maybe have to be careful at times with that. Just looking at some of the examples of the projects we've laid out, there's a Nikolai on the Kuskokwim River, had a series of sort of shaded fuel breaks going around the outskirts of the village that stand out nicely when viewed from an airplane when there's snow on the ground like this. Alakaka, there were things were done in a couple different locations and phases at Alakaka. In this case, you can see sort of a subdivision with some sort of cleared areas around the structures, almost kind of a firewise kind of prescription going on in some of those cases. Here at Hughes, there was a kind of a steep hillside right behind the village, and there was the clearing of brush and trees and on that hillside. And you can see from the thing, you kind of wonder how much of a threat it was for a fire to burn downslope into the village coming from behind there anyway. Maybe a treatment would have been more effective, you know, and more the benchland kind of on top of that slope above there. In any case, this picture was taken some years ago, but in 2015, there was a fire that kicked off 12 or 15 miles away and eventually burnt right to the top of that hill and did not come into the village. So I guess you could sort of count that, for whatever reason, as maybe a successful implementation of a fuel break. Here's the view of TANACROSS, where we did that first project that we started back in the mid 2000s. And in 2009, there was a fire that started across the Alaska Highway. From there, jumped the highway and kind of burnt up to the outskirts of the village onto the edges of the fuel break. The main front of the fire, fortunately, did not come barreling straight at the village. Otherwise, they might have had a real issue. Apparently, the fuel break probably did serve some function in terms of at least enabling crews to stay in place and help protect the village from the fire coming in. And so we were kind of excited because at the time, because that was one of the first example that we had of a fuels treatment that we had put in that actually played some sort of a role in protecting the community. TANACROSS was this picture here of the fire going on. Of course, having a fire right in the vicinity, of course, changes the whole fuels structure of the whole area and kind of puts you in a whole different environment. This was exacerbated just a few years later. In 2012, there was a major wind event happened in September there and took most of the remaining trees that were left in the shaded fuel break and just blew them over. And there was some structural damage of trees blowing on top of houses, and things got really messy. So you go back to TANACROSS today, and it is a completely different place than it was before all these treatments started back in the mid 2000s, when there was a village just kind of sitting in a dense, mature white spruce stand. Now it's almost a field with various, you know, regen and brush and things coming up. And there's still areas around TANACROSS where the slash has not been dealt with or picked up very well. There's been various projects and efforts to deal with some of it. They have some biomass facilities there, and I think they've been pulling in some of it to fuel that. And but of course, the blowdown that was presented by that windstorm, what happened right at TANACROSS was a small part of what happened in the whole region there. I think what was an estimate of 40,000 or 70,000 acres or something like that of forest blew down in that event, generated some concern about this maybe an uptick on the upper Tanana IPS problems that we had seen earlier. And so there were some forest health projects and stuff that happened in the region in the years after that, trying to determine what was going on there and trying to assist it. That IPS outbreak never materialized to the degree that we were afraid it would. Anyway, just the closing thoughts on our projects. There's been, you know, a lot of these projects scattered around. I think there's been some great work done. We're proud of what we've done, but man, there is just so much to do out there. Like I say, every one of our several dozen communities could benefit from one of these things. The places where we have worked, to now benefit from either an expansion of the work that had been done or maintenance on the work that had been done. We've got some research, hopefully, that we're getting lined up with the folks at the university, Jen Schmidt and folks, to look more closely at a lot of these treatments to see what the state of affairs is with them. And our planning and prioritization of all these projects could be much better. Most of the time we've been doing this, we really haven't had a dedicated fuels forest through our staff. And so it's just my forestry staff and sometimes my fire staff sort of filling in and sort of managing these projects as they happen. And it's been difficult for us to sort of get these things all sort of like planned for and prepped and lined up and sitting on the shelf and ready for available funding. It's more common that we have somebody from some village hears about the benefits of one of these things and shows up in our doorway, and we end up sort of treating the squeaky wheel and dealing with projects in that order, not in the order of maybe some sort of perceived risk to various communities. So I think there's been some issues about how we could be managing this program better, despite the productivity we have been able to get done. I think there's lots of ways to improve on that, and we hope to. I think this needs to be a real focus of some of our efforts around some of these communities, and especially in the context of climate change and just general risk to the communities. And anyway, that's it. And I guess we'll move on to the next presentation. And so I'll stop sharing my screen. That's the appropriate thing, right? Like that. So.
Yep. And then now, Darren, you want to start?
Yeah, definitely. Thank you very much, Will. That was a great presentation, especially on that TANACROSS part. I was involved in helping secure the fire edge there on that Eagle Trail. So it brought back a lot of memories for me. So great presentation, and I'll do my best to follow that act here. So greetings, everybody. My name is Darren Finley. I'm the State of Alaska Wild Fuels Coordinator. This is a newly appointed position for the state, and I just stepped into it within the last couple months here. I believe that Jeremy Dowse would have been doing this part of the presentation, and I've been working with him and also his counterpart, Hans Rinke, who's the Southern Region Forester, over the past couple months, and I'm greatly impressed with their skills and their breadth of knowledge, and I definitely look forward to learning more from them. So hopefully I can do his presentation some justice, and we'll start it off. I'm gonna cut off my camera so it's not distracting here, and then I'm gonna share my screen. I have a presentation from Jeremy that I'd like to share, and then also a quick presentation that I have been using at the beginning of this year for a couple of different use cases. All right. So the state's role in fuels management in interior Alaska. So starting off with our mission statement here, this is the fire mission. Just to kind of give you guys a little context, which I'm sure you guys are very aware of, but our job here is cost-effective and efficient fire protection service on state, private, and municipal lands, and commiserate with the values at risk. All right, the next slide here is showing the different geographical regions for state of Alaska fire protection split up, and that's shown by the blue lines there. The pink dots there, that's state lands within the Tanana Valley State Forest. And I think it's a little, I think the dots are a little misrepresenting, but I think you guys get the gist, and of that's kind of the boundary that we're talking about. Overlaying on top of that, excuse me, overlaying on top of that is a map of large fire scars on the landscape of Alaska. And you can see how that definitely impacts the Tanana Valley State Forest there. And when I first saw this slide, my first thought was that is a great representation of, the number one cause of fire in Alaska, lightning, I like to refer to that as the lightning belt, and coming in from the landmass of Canada and working its way over toward the water there. All right, so our fuels program, these next few slides is kind of some historic context on that. And primarily, our fuels program has been very opportunistic. We rely heavily in the past on federal WUI funding. And that process, I'm sure a lot of you are aware, that process is competition. And within our each areas, we start to compete for funding between the different geographic areas. And at times that can cause some conflict. Historically, we've used our agency crews to complete the work, and that's given us a way to keep our seasonal employees moving farther into the year for work. And of course, after a big fire season, the public perception, the public awareness of wildland fire intensifies, and conversely, our fuels projects seem to step up there as well. So 2004 fire season, it's a really busy fire year for all of us. I remember it clearly, and spent a lot of time in Tok. And this slide on the right shows the large fires on the landscape there. This was one of the years that had a mega fire. I'm sure some have heard of that classification, but we experienced a mega fire there. And it also resulted with over 15 days of hazardous air for the Tanana Valley there. As a result, we were able to start a GIS exercise in 2005. And in the Fairbanks area, we took some values such as the fuels, the topography, and values at risk, and we were able to get those into a geospatial map and analysis for us. And it really helped us start to work toward a planning process. On the top slide there, it's got a pink, purple, a red, and a green. And the priority for any type of fuels projects were given into that pink being the highest priority, and then working down to red, and then the lowest priority was represented in green there. This GIS exercise, like I mentioned, it allowed us to work to develop a work plan and focus some of the revenue streams, which at this time would have been the WUI grants, to start to work on fuels projects. And the bottom slide there is showing the representation of Old Murphy Dome fuel break, which was a result from part of this planning process. You have to forgive me, I'm not very tuned into the biomass opportunities or the biomass program of the Division of Forestry yet, but I do know, again, it's very opportunistic. And I am aware, like, our flagship program is up there in the Tok area, and we have, we definitely use some of the fuel that comes off of fuels projects in the biomass programs. Okay, so what Jeremy was going for here, we're starting to kind of bring national attention to fuel mitigation projects. So he got a table together from 1983 to 2000, and that highlighted area from 2004 to 2020 just shows the acres per year dramatically increasing at a higher rate there as opposed to the previous years. And he's got the 2019 highlighted because of how much of an impact that was on Alaska. It is definitely nationally a lower fire, lower acreage fire year on the national level, but it was a definite impact to Alaska specific in 2019. So as our fire activity is increasing, so is the awareness of our fuels projects to hopefully to try to get ahead of that. Specifically, again, in 2019, we had 2.5 million acres in state protection area that was involved with fire. We had costs of 224 million with a total of 84 structures lost in that process. And then the notable fires were Swan Lake, McKinley, and Shovel. So again, that increase in fire activity over the recent history here has led to more national attention, and that has caused the National Cohesive Wildland Fire Management Strategy, and focusing on resilient landscapes, fire adapted communities, and effective wildfire response. That national strategy has then been kind of split up into regional committees, and the Alaska region is represented by the AWFCG, and that's the Alaska Wildland Fire Coordinating Group. Within that, we have some subcommittees, and specific to this conversation, and my job is the fuels subcommittee. And we have, everybody that has a stakeholder or vested interest in wildland fire management are represented in that coordinating group, and also broke down into the fuels. I've just been added to that fuels subcommittee, and I definitely look forward to working with my counterparts there, and that it's been a kind of an exciting process for me to switch gears from my former job. As we break that down a little bit more to my neck of the woods, which is DOF, we're split into two separate ways of tackling the fuels program. We have the fire and aviation program specifically. That's where my position, the fuels coordinator, falls under, and I'll be providing programmatic guidance. I'll be coordinating agency efforts and grants and funding, and also working with our partner agencies and cooperators, and also just working on our geospatial process, working with ArcGIS, our ArcGIS, I like to call it wizards, and our reporting standards. That's one thing that I really enjoy, and I have some really good ideas on how to leverage our technology to bring our fuels program to the next level. So the second part of DOF's split there is that regional and area management, and that's where Jeremy comes in, that's where Hans comes in, and they will be working on identifying meaningful projects, the execution and management of those projects, and contract compliance, and just really getting the projects to that point of being shovel ready. All right, our strategy will be for me. Part of that is going to be a big planning aspect to it. Again, tackling and wrangling the funding sources, and working on the staffing, and that's a big step for us. Seems like, and I'll get to this in the other slides, that we're getting more attention, and with that we're getting more access to funding streams. But we can throw all the money we want at these fuel projects, but if we don't have boots on the ground and actual implementation happening, the money is not the end step there. So staffing is a big part of what I'm working on. And then also the strategy is just partners and cooperators, and just leveraging each other and our funds to work together when our projects overlap, and just maximize fuel mitigation on the landscape. Our current planning effort, we have identified 14.9 million in projects, and we're working on securing that money on through different sources. The big one of the big keys on identifying that planning and those projects is through the CWPPs. We do have a developed fuels layer within ARC, and but I definitely plan to round that out more. I would like to have the ability to see current projects, proposed projects, funding sources, maintenance schedules, and the list goes on, but I am very excited about that. Seems like once a week I'm working on a different legislative briefing paper, trying to secure those different revenue streams. And also, as I come up on step in this new program, I'm identifying our shortcomings, which is definitely going to be, execution, contract capacity, and making sure that we have the right geospatial data on the map. So still working toward that. To elaborate a little bit more on the funding sources that the fuel program, the state's fuels program is receiving, we of course have state funding. These come in capital improvement projects and cost recovery. We'll be working toward fuel break maintenance with that. Again, the staffing, capital assets, possibly some chippers or some smaller tools to help with mitigating the fuel. And also that money is used for cost share as well, which brings us to the federal funding. And those have restrictions, and those restrictions primarily is they're mostly matched. So within the WUI and the CPG, again, that would be a matched fund, but that is a large source of our fuel mitigation revenue. We have the Good Neighbor Authority. There's no cost share there. And we've got a great working relationship with the BLM, and we've, been able to leverage that funding with Casey there toward one of our current projects right now. So that's going full steam ahead with that revenue source. And then also we have the FMAG. I don't have too much experience with the FMAG, but once the fires have been declared emergency, we can apply for federal assistance, and that can be up to a 75% reimbursement. And I believe that there's process out there to allocate some of that toward fuels projects. And then another one is the Pittman, the P&R grant funding, and that we work heavily with our with Sue to leverage fish and wildlife habitat and fuel mitigation together with that source of funding, Pittman Robinson. So our staffing, currently we've got this position, mine, that is just coming online, the state's fuel coordinator. I work for Norm, the state, the chief of fire and aviation. And, we also have our agency fire crews that do quite a bit of fuel mitigation, our area technicians that also do quite a bit of fuel removal and reduction. And we have our fire management staff right now, and our regional and area foresters that are working to line these projects up. Where we want to push that is we want to continue to build the framework for the fuels program. And we would like to look at, and we are looking at regional and area fuels staff, possibly a fuels crew or a module. Definitely we're going to need some more support with procurement and contracting, possibly a short-term GIS specialist to come in and help us with some of the attributes that we're looking to capture there, and definitely some more administrative support. The purpose of this slide, I believe, is just to highlight more of our partners and cooperators, and stress the emphasis of working together to leveraging our projects to their fullest capacity, and to also speak to how there's more buy-in to fuels mitigation. So each one of these partners and cooperators are also ramping up their programs as well. So currently, a couple other add-ons, we have more investment from the state of Alaska into fuels work. And this is above the DOF side of things. We were able to have some legislative buy-in that was allocated more funds to our program. That's a really good stroke for us. And also the governor has proposed a bonds package for infrastructure. And the original proposal was 20 million specifically for fuels work. As time goes on, that's being dived into a little deeper. And right now, a big push, what I've been working on this week is more justification and requests for the American Rescue Plan. So there's another revenue stream, and we're definitely hoping to be able to get some of that toward fuels projects. They were able to hire my position, and we have an emphasis currently for the DOF program with living with wildfire, and a lot of that work is going to be taken care of by our public information officer, as well in conjunction with our fire prevention program. We've got some separate grants out there that the prevention program has secured. And with one of those grants, they were able to start a new mascot for us with the slogan of, taking time to learn before you burn. And that mascot went through a naming contest, and Spruce was the winner. So Spruce the Moose is a thing now, and we hope to spread fire prevention awareness. And this directly ties into fuels projects by getting the public buy-in, and hopefully some fuel mitigation around the private residents as well. We also have two good neighbor authority agreements with BLM for fuels projects. I mentioned that earlier. In the Tanana Valley State Forest, we currently have the old Murphy Dome fuel break, and we're working maintenance on that. And that's been a roller chopper that has been going through there. That has currently been paused due to our snow load and the effectiveness, but that will be resuming in the fall. And on the right slide there, we have the Delta West fuel break. I know that that is in an early phase, planning phase, but we're definitely going to be breaking ground on that and leveraging the different funds that are involved. So those were more of the mechanical. We're looking in the Tanana Valley here now at shaded fuel breaks. Our two prime examples are on the Anderson community of Anderson. I really like these two slides. They show just clear delineation of fuel breaks protecting the values at risks in the two different communities here. Anderson has the UAF Nanooks and also the White Mountain hand crews in there working with the shaded fuel breaks. After they get done with that, the next project there is working on the Vista Gold. Right, just to highlight, and again, I'm sure many of you know, CWPPs are a very pivotal tool that we use for strategic planning and also funding, securing funding streams. And we have a big push right now in the Copper River Valley with getting new CWPPs and updates to some of the existing ones. So that's I believe they're also going to be looking at hiring a project coordinator for the Copper River. All right, that's at the end of Jeremy's slideshow. And I just really quickly, I hope I'm not running out of time too much. I wanted to go over one that I have here. Let me reshare Okay, how's that look, guys? Can you see my
Yep.
face there? Okay, this is just real quick, just so we can kind of just cap it off. And I do apologize, I forgot to really introduce my background, but we're kind of past that point. But I've been doing fire, and for 21 years, I have a primary operational background. I've ran with programmatic experience in leading a prevention program for about 5 of those years, and been working toward a planning aspect lately, working on my planning section chief there. So I wanted to bring this slide up, and then the next two, please write down my phone number and my contact information. If you guys, if I can help out in any way in any fuels related topics there. So quickly, my hopefully this isn't too redundant, but quickly my short-term and mid-term and long-term targets for standing up this program is gathering that SA short-term, just finding our strengths and our weaknesses, and trying to work to either enhance or eliminate those. Definitely working on the funding streams, and introducing myself and my position into our cooperative partnerships there. Midterm, this is really kind of the bulk of it, and it kind of sounds like a cheesy TV show tagline, but really getting this people and process and product framework in place. So getting the people, getting the positions, getting the support to get the fuels projects going, getting our process down, whether that's accurate reporting or accurate specifications, just really hammering that down so boots on the ground can be more efficient. And then product, making sure that we're actually getting beneficial and fuels removal and reduction on the landscape. And then long term, some of the things that I'm looking at is just alleviating the area manager workload. They become task saturated many times during the season, and fuels plays a part in that. Hopefully this position and the framework that I stand up will help alleviate that. Again, longer work for seasonal employees, that will be directly helping the retention of our state workforce. And then also just to continue to make sure that the program is working, that we're getting acres treated, and that we're leveraging it to the highest degree possible. The last one here is just, again, my contact information. And I really appreciate you guys allowing me to step in here for Jeremy, and hopefully it was of some benefit. I'll turn it over here. Thank you very much.
All right, thank you, Darren. Thank you, Will. If you have questions for Darren and Will, we'll take them at the end. If you want, you can type them in the chat right now. Our next speakers are from Northern Arizona University. So we have Michelle Mack. She's a professor of ecosystem ecology at Northern Arizona University. She's also research professor at University of Alaska Fairbanks, and I guess recently the director of the Bonanza Creek Long-Term Ecological Research Station. That's our experimental forest outside Fairbanks. Melissa Boyd is a research scientist at Northern Arizona University, focusing on tree growth, response to climate and disturbance. Also scheduled to speak was Jen Schmidt, associate professor, natural resource management and policy at University of Alaska Anchorage. She focuses in the human environment and interactions. She was unable to make it today, but Michelle will be presenting her section. They're all working together on a National Science Foundation proposal, so that'll be exciting for fuels management in Alaska. All right, I guess we'll start off with Melissa and take it away.
All right. So well, thanks, Will and Darren, for those talks. It was really great to hear about these field projects from a management perspective.
Hey, Melissa, we can see your notes. Can you put
Oh,
it?
you can see my notes?
Yeah.
Let's see. Maybe I can, if I do this one. Okay.
Oh, we can still see them.
Melissa, in your display settings at the top.
Yeah.
There, and you'll be fine.
Automatic. Maybe Dell. It was working before. I don't know why it's not working now. Okay, what can people see?
That's good.
Okay, good. Okay, yeah, thanks, Dan, for the intro. So I work in Michelle Max Lab at Northern Arizona University, and today I'm going to be going over the results of a project where we sampled a network of thinned and shear-bladed treatments across interior Alaska to see how fire behavior and ecosystem processes change in these treatments over time. And before beginning, I just want to acknowledge the funding agencies that made this research possible, as well as individuals that helped us get access to many of these sites. I'd like to thank Dane Reed and Eric Miller at the BLM, and then Ray Atwood from Togatili Alaska Native Corporation for helping us access many of the sites for this project. And Michelle and I would also like to acknowledge the Alaska Native Nations upon whose ancestral lands this project was carried out. So as many of the people on this call probably already know, black spruce is the dominant tree species in interior Alaska and occupies almost 50% of the central part of the state. And black spruce stands are characterized by cold and moist soils where nutrient turnover and decomposition are slow. And in these stands, moss forms a continuous ground cover, and deep insulating organic layers protect underlying permafrost or permanently frozen soils from thawing. And these forests are highly flammable, and they typically experience high intensity stand replacing crown fires. And historically, post-fire conditions in these stands favor black spruce self-replacement, with black spruce seedlings establishing on burned organic soils within the first few years after fire. However, with increasing wildfire activity at high latitudes, and in particular the increases in fire severity, there's deeper burning of the organic layer, which favors the establishment of deciduous tree species and shifts the trajectory of these stands towards deciduous dominance. And because fire behavior is so extreme in these black spruce forests, they're considered the problem field type in Alaska, and they pose the greatest threat to community protection. Deciduous forests are also common throughout the interior, and they differ vastly from black spruce forests. These forests are characterized by warm and well-drained soils where nutrient turnover and decomposition are rapid. Organic soils are shallow in these stands, mosses are uncommon, and permafrost is typically not present. Fire behavior is also less extreme in these stands because they have high moisture content and they're less flammable than black spruce. And so typically these fires in these stands are low severity, and crowning only occurs in extreme fire years. And with increasing wildfire activity in boreal Alaska, there's a greater need for wildfire risk mitigation to protect rural and urban communities, and this can be done through fuel reduction treatments. And hand thinning and shear blading are the primary fuel reduction treatments that have been applied in Alaska, and they've primarily been applied in these black spruce dominated stands that are prone to extreme fire behavior. And while these treatments are not meant to stop fire on their own, through the removal or reduction of fuels, they're meant to reduce fire behavior, such as rate of fire spread. And these treatments are also really useful for aiding firefighters in controlling fires. And these treatments have been really effective in stopping fire progress in the interior Alaska, but they introduce a novel disturbance that may have unique and potentially unfavorable impacts on ecosystem processes. And because these treatments introduce a novel disturbance, we don't know what successional pathways they will follow, such as will they transition back to highly flammable black spruce stands, or will they transition to deciduous dominated stands that could act as permanent and living fuel breaks. There's also uncertainty about what understory fuels establish in these treatments and how these fuels change over time. as well as the impacts of these treatments on organic layer reaccumulation and permafrost stability. So for example, disturbance to the organic layer can result in permafrost thaw, and this can lead to ground slumping and tree displacement. And this would make it really difficult for firefighters to access these sites. And then lastly, the management interval necessary in these treatments so that they continue to effectively reduce fire behavior is still uncertain. And it's really important for us to address some of these knowledge gaps so that we can more strategically implement these treatments and maintain them. And so to address some of these uncertainties, we propose 2 overarching research questions. The first is how do vegetation, soils, and permafrost differ in these treatments compared to unmanaged black spruce dominated stands? And then how do these variables change over time in these fuel reduction treatments? And the second is how long are these treatments effective in reducing rate of fire spread, which is the metric of fire behavior that we assessed in this study. And so to address these questions, in 2018, we remeasured a network of thinned and shear-bladed treatments across interior Alaska that were established between 2001 and 2011. Each of these treated sites was paired with a closed, unmanaged black spruce stand, and these sites were previously measured in 2012 and 2013. And so at each site and at each paired unmanaged site, we established 2 20-meter transects. And along these transects, we measured seedling density, vegetation composition and ground cover, and organic layer depth and thaw depth. And on this lower panel, there's the different stand types that we sampled. The left is a closed black spruce stand, the center is a thin stand, and on the right is a shear-bladed stand. We also classified each site into a fuel type based on the Fuel Model Guide to Alaska Vegetation. And this was used to determine the rate of fire spread at each site. And here's an example of some of the sites when they were sampled in 2012 and 2013. And then here are those same sites when we sampled them in 2018. You can already see that there's some substantial changes in the understory in these shear-bladed sites, but the thin sites look pretty similar between these 2 time points. Okay, so first I will present some of the findings associated with our first research question, which is how do vegetation, soils, and permafrost differ in these treatments compared to unmanaged stands, and how do these variables change over time? And in these thin sites, we did not see a change in seedling density over time, but seedling density was the greatest at shallow organic layer depths. And that's shown in this figure. We have organic layer depth on the x-axis and seedling densities on the y-axis. The different colors denote the different seedling types. And as Will mentioned before, in these thin sites, oftentimes slash piles or the fuels that are removed or burned on site. And in these patches, the organic layer is also often combusted. And that explains these shallow organic layers in these thin sites, because thinning itself doesn't result in organic layer removal. And while we didn't directly test the impacts of this slash burning on seedling density, this slash burning likely provided a suitable seedbed for tree establishment. And it suggests that disturbance of the organic layer in these thinned areas promotes tree recruitment. In shear-bladed sites, there wasn't an impact of organic layer depth on seedling density. And while deciduous seedling density didn't change over time, we saw persistent conifer recruitment even 10 years after the sites had been treated. And that's shown here. We have years after treatment on the x-axis and seedling densities on the y. Conifer trees are shown on the left panel, and the deciduous trees are shown on the right panel. And this continued recruitment of conifers in these treatments is really surprising, because it has been well established that tree seedling recruitment occurs within just the first few years after fire on disturbed soils in black spruce forests. And this result really highlights the novelty of this disturbance. And it suggests that we need to continue monitoring these sites to see if conifer recruitment persists for longer timescales. So we also compared tree and seedling density in unmanaged sites to treated sites. And here we have relative conifer tree and seedling density on the y-axis compared to unmanaged versus treated areas on the x-axis. And a 1 means that the site is 100% conifers, and 0 means it's 100% deciduous trees. And although most thin sites maintain conifer dominance, there was a shift to deciduous tree dominance in 2 thin sites where fuels were burned on site. And that's shown on the left panel and it's indicated by those orange points and lines. And this supports our conclusion that disturbance of the organic layer in these thinned areas increases tree recruitment, and that we might actually be able to shift the trajectory of these treatments towards deciduous dominance by disturbing the organic layer. But we need more measurements to confirm this because this was only observed in 2 of our thin sites. And in all shearbladed sites, which are shown on the right panel, there was a shift to deciduous dominance, and that's denoted also by these orange points and lines. And this suggests that all of these shearbladed areas are following a deciduous trajectory. Shearblading also vastly altered the understory, whereas thinning did not have substantial impacts on the understory. And this is an ordination, and it shows differences in vascular plant cover and ground cover in thin shearbladed and unmanaged sites. And thin sites, which are denoted by the brown triangles, and the unmanaged sites, which are denoted by the blue squares, were dominated by mosses, lichen, and evergreen shrubs. And the shearbladed sites, which are the yellow circles, were dominated by grasses and tall deciduous shrubs such as dwarf birch and alder, and a ground cover of litter. In shearbladed sites, understory fuels also changed over time, but they didn't change over time in the thin sites. And this ordination only has shearbladed sites plotted, and the different point colors indicate years after treatment, as shown in this legend. And then the arrow points in the direction of change with years after treatment. And so over time, there is a shift from forbs, equisetum, and a burned organic layer, which is denoted by these dark colors in these young sites, to a greater abundance of grasses and tall deciduous shrubs and a ground cover of litter in the older sites. And there was also limited to no moss recovery in these shearbladed sites. And these results suggest that there's a change in fuel quality over time in these shearbladed areas, and that these shearbladed areas are moving towards a higher density of more fine fuels as they age. In both thinned and shearbladed treatments, there was an increase in thaw depth over time. And thaw depth increased at a faster rate in these shearbladed treatments. And that's shown in these figures. We have years after treatment on the X and thaw depth difference is on the Y. Thaw depth difference is the thaw depth in the treated minus the unmanaged area. So if it's above 0, that means it's greater in the treated area. Thaw depth was also the greatest at shallow organic layer depths, highlighting that greater disturbance of the organic layer results in greater thaw depth. And that's shown here. We have organic layer depth on the x-axis and then thaw depth difference on the y-axis. And these findings show that both thinning and shearblading disrupt permafrost stability. And we also compared organic layer depth and thaw depth in these treated areas to unmanaged stands. And the organic layer depth was shallower in both thin and shearbladed treatments compared to unmanaged black spruce dominated forests. And that's shown here with organic layer depth on the y-axis, and the different treatment types are on the x. And shearblading resulted in the greatest disturbance to the organic layer. And as I mentioned in the previous slide, that directly impacts permafrost stability. And that's further demonstrated here, where you can see that permafrost thaw was greater in both treatments compared to unmanaged stands. And this figure has thaw depth on the y-axis and then the different treatment types on the x. And shearbladed treatments, which also had the shallowest organic layer depth, had the greatest thaw depth. And as I mentioned at the beginning of the presentation, destabilization of permafrost in these treatments is a concern because it can cause tree displacement and ground slumping. This would make it hazardous and really difficult for firefighters to access these sites. And so regarding our first question, we showed that there was high seedling recruitment at shallow organic layer depths in these thinned areas. And this suggests that we could shift the trajectory of these treatments towards deciduous dominance by disturbing the organic layer. In shearbladed areas, there was persistent conifer recruitment, but all of these treatments are following a deciduous trajectory. Thinning did not modify understory fuels, whereas shearblading did modify understory fuels, and there was an increase in fine fuels over time in this treatment. Both thinned and shearbladed treatments had shallower organic layer depths than unmanaged sites. And in both treatments, thaw depth increased over time, and thought it was greater in these treated areas than it was in unmanaged sites. The final results I'll go over are related to our second question, which is how long are these treatments effective at reducing rate of fire spread? And there was no change in rate of fire spread over time in these thin treatments, and they were all effective at reducing rate of spread. And that's shown in this figure where we have years after treatment on the X and rate of spread difference on the Y-axis. And rate of spread difference is the rate of spread in the treated minus the unmanaged closed black spruce stand. So values below 0 mean that the treatment is effective at reducing rate of fire spread. And then the different point colors denote the fuel types based on the Fuel Model Guide to Alaska Vegetation. And as thinning reduces canopy fuels, and it does not modify understory fuels, which we showed in our ordination. And we wouldn't expect the canopy to drastically change within 20 years after treatment, so we wouldn't expect rate of spread to change either. And that's demonstrated by this figure. There was also no change in rate of fire spread over time in these shear-bladed treatments. But as you can see here, there was variability in their fuel type, and there was also substantial variability in rate of fire spread between these different fuel types. And because we saw an increase in fine fuels in the understory over time in these shear-bladed areas, we also expected rate of spread to increase over time as these fine fuels accumulate. However, these fuel types don't account for differences in understory fuels and therefore aren't capturing the changes in understory structure that we observed. And therefore, they're potentially not capturing changes in rate of fire spread over time. And this result suggests that we need to account for compositional changes in fuel amount and quality in the understory so we can determine how fire behavior changes in these sites. And this could be done by creating fuel classifications that more accurately represent these shear-bladed treatments. And this result also suggests that we don't know how long these shear-bladed treatments are effective at reducing rate of fire spread. So overall, we show the manipulation of the organic layer in these thinned areas could shift their trajectory towards deciduous dominance. We show that shear-bladed areas will not return to black spruce dominance because they were deciduous dominated and had limited to no moss recovery. Thinning did not modify understory fuels, whereas shear-blading did modify understory fuels, and there was an increase in fine fuels over time in this treatment. Both thinning and shear-blading resulted in increased permafrost thaw, and particularly in areas where the organic layer was disturbed. And because thinning only modifies canopy fuels, it's effective at reducing rate of spread for up to 20 years after treatment. However, in shear-bladed treatments, the fuel types did not capture changes in understory composition over time, so it's uncertain for how long these treatments are effective at reducing rate of fire spread. Okay, now I'll pass presentation on over to Michelle. I guess I can exit out of my screen.
Oh, wait, no, keep your screen, Melissa.
No.
Just next slide.
Okay.
All right. Okay, well, I'm Michelle Mack, and let's see, next slide there, Melissa. Okay. I'm excited to come and tell you guys a little bit about a grant proposal that Jennifer Schmidt from University of Alaska Anchorage and I have been working on for, well, we've been working on this for over a year now, and many people in the fire and the land management community in Alaska have helped us out, have shared ideas. They've been generous with their time as we've tried to pull together a project. And this is now in review at the National Science Foundation with the Navigating the New Arctic program. And even if it doesn't get funded, I feel like we've got enough momentum that we're gonna, move forward seeking other funding. We're excited about this project. So what we're interested in is integrating social ecological systems and ecology, the kind of ecology that I do, with risk management and economics to design fuel breaks, to better understand fuel breaks in Alaska. And our title is Social Ecological Considerations for Sustainable Fuel Treatments to Reduce Wildfire Risk. And this project is right now led by Jennifer Schmidt, and then there's a group from Northern Arizona University, including Joe Little, that some of you may know from the University of Alaska Fairbanks. He's an economist. But then we've also got this group of larger group, which includes Fabian Kern at the Tanana Chiefs Conference. We've talked a lot to Will Putman as well, where we're going to partner with them to work on existing and new field breaks in the interior Alaska region. We also have a group from the Forest Service and the University of Colorado and the BLM, the Wiry group that really specializes in social considerations for construction of field breaks and fire management. And then finally, we have Allison York and Randy Jant from University of Alaska Fairbanks representing the Alaska Fire Science Consortia. So in this project, we want to co-produce knowledge. We want to integrate conventional knowledge with academic knowledge. And, I am here the ecologist in this project. So there's a lot of diversity and ways of understanding that come from all of these other partners. My part is just a small part of a bigger picture. Next slide, please, Melissa. Okay, just to go over briefly the objectives of the project, we want to produce a knowledge co-production framework where we can evaluate field treatments and we can examine the multiple goals that the community that works with field treatment has. And so as part of this project, we would assemble a statewide working group to develop this framework. For the ecological component, we're really interested in continuing the work that Melissa has shown you, assessing the ecological effects of field treatments, and then also understanding consequences of the ecology for maintenance, for the ecosystem services that field treatments provide, and then finally for the risk abatement for communities, wildfire behavior, and how firefighters can use these field breaks. We're going to evaluate alternative treatment designs to achieve these different types of goals. And then finally, we're going to look at the social acceptability and the economic feasibility of field treatment options to optimize these three components. Next slide, please, Melissa. All right, so I thought I would just tell you as the end point here, a little bit about the ecological questions. And these questions really emerged from our conversations with the community of land and fire management managers in Alaska. And the first question that emerged was understanding the factors that control post-treatment successional trajectories of forest regeneration and the rates of fuel accumulation. So that's right in line with what Melissa has been talking about earlier. The second question is understanding whether we can use the construction or the design of field breaks to really direct successional trajectories. So to decrease conifer recruitment and increase deciduous tree recruitment so that field breaks are, well, they're more self-sustaining or they're able to persist longer, or we're able to have some of their benefits longer on the landscape. And then finally, we really want to understand how design links into both the design and the construction of field breaks, links into fire behavior, into how firefighters or even recreational users can move through those areas, how field breaks affect forest health or things like tipping trees or beetle outbreaks, how field breaks provide wildlife habitat or subsistence resources, how they affect permafrost in the interior, and then finally how landowners perceive these different aspects. And for our research, we want to expand out of, well, most of our work has been done around Fairbanks in the past, but we would like to expand out into larger regions. And so our partnership with the Tanana Chiefs, with the TCC group will allow us to work with them to understand field breaks that are farther afield in some of these rural communities. And our work with them will include both revisiting older field breaks, but also constructing new field breaks where we can look at ecological processes before and after field break construction. We are going to extend down the boreal Cordillera ecoregion down towards Whitehorse, where we're working with the Yukon Territory government to look at newly constructed field breaks there, as well as older field breaks. And then finally, we want to extend our ecological understanding into the marine West Coast forest down by the Kenai Peninsula and Anchorage. And we're planning for surveys like Melissa described, as well as more intensive surveys where we have before and after information for sites. But then we also have some experiments, which I'm kind of excited about, that we've been calling successional intervention experiments. So we want to manipulate different components of these systems to see how we might design the construction process to really encourage the establishment of deciduous trees and to discourage the establishment of coniferous trees. All right, so that is our presentation today. Thank you very much for listening.
All right. Thank you, Melissa and Michelle. Very interesting, and Will and Darren. So I got a little bit here, 15 minutes or so. We can open it up for questions, and I can read the ones out of the chat. I guess my first question for Michelle, on your proposal, are you going to look at the economics of fuel breaks maintenance versus the techniques that were used to establish them? Now we're drifting towards hydroaxing more than we are with shear blading, largely because the pile burning creates some issues, but that leaves a lot of woody debris that affects site regeneration. So then we also look at scarifying the site to deal with the woody debris to get the hardwood regeneration. One of your perspectives on the economical side of these multiple entries and maintenance issues.
Yeah, so part of the plan is that we would quantify those two components, both the initial construction costs and then the maintenance costs. And then we would be able to break it down into, different commonly used techniques. And then we would also be able to cost out what some of these nudges or changes in fuel break design might be that our experiments would point us towards. And so we have, well, you probably know Joe Little. So he's been very focused on the economic side of this, as well as Matt Berman at the University of Alaska Anchorage. And so that's their part of the proposed research to quantify the costs of these things so that we can, when we think about designing new fuel breaks, we can include both the ecology, but also the social acceptance, the fire abatement or fire mitigation, and then the cost of those things.
All right, thank you. Question in the chat. This is to Will. Will, you'll be looking at carbon dynamics of different fuel breaks. Oh, I think that wasn't a Will, that's to everyone. So whoever wants to answer that, maybe Melissa or Michelle. Are you looking at carbon in the fuel breaks?
Oh, is that from John Yeary? Hi, John.
Yes, it is.
We did in our first set of surveys that were in 2013 and 2014, because at that time there was sort of a mandate for us to look at carbon. And so we didn't look at it this second time because we thought the stocks were unlikely to change over 5 years. Of course, it's of great interest to us. Yeah, that's that's my answer. I mean, fuel breaks, clearly they decrease carbon stocks, thinning substantially less than the shear bladed sites. But most of the carbon that's removed is removed from the soil organic layer in that windrow burning.
Seems like if you're considering carbon with that, at least in our experience, our fuel treatments are so small, we're not talking huge acreages of affecting carbon, but anyway, it seems like you'd have to be looking at not so much the carbon stocks of the fuel break itself, but how it's affecting carbon stocks on surrounding landscape. If you're controlling the movement of fires, you're basically, you might be allowing carbon to be sequestered in areas where it might be burned off.
Yeah, that's a great idea, Will. I like the idea of looking at the sort of the landscape context and how these field breaks might change landscape scale patterns of burning and carbon emissions. Yeah, we have another project, and this is with Scott Getz, who's a remote sensor, where we want to look more at those types of patterns, not focusing as much on field breaks, but I think that the data that we will collect could form a platform for working with, well, some of the people out here on this call that are modelers of wildfires, where we could look more at landscape scale carbon dynamics and how field breaks might affect those.
All right, I see a question about berries, and Michelle, you answered that. You'll be looking at berry production on these field breaks for subsistence. Melissa, I have my question for you. What do you think about scarifying the open sites like shearblade sites? Would that speed the site moving towards deciduous?
Well, I think that I think that because the shearblading already removes most of the organic layer, that doesn't really need to be done. Because in one of the figures that I showed, deciduous seedlings are dominating those shearbladed sites. So there's just way more of the deciduous seedlings in the shearbladed sites already, just because of the organic layer removal. But in the thin sites, because it doesn't directly result in organic layer removal, scarification in those sites is what resulted in deciduous tree recruitment. Yeah.
Thank you. If anybody else has any questions, type them in or speak up.
Yeah, this is Will again. I'm just speaking back to that carbon issue again. Maybe a quippy sort of response would be, we're really trying to keep homeowners to continue to sequester carbon in their houses.
You're saying the house is a carbon sink, Will.
We want the values at risk there are those little pockets of constructed carbon that we're trying to maintain, right?
I think Ken Winterberger had a question about balancing costs of both structural risk to the built environment, and then the cost of construction. It's in the chat. And one thing that I'm excited about on this project that we've proposed is working with Fabian and Will at TCC, because part of the project, funding will go to their organization to do training, and we're going to be able to tag along and work on monitoring protocols that then communities will be able to monitor some of these sites. So I think that, well, that's my science perspective on what's really cool. But then also the economists on our project will quantify the cost of construction, and then risk assessment, or looking at the cost of what would happen if there was a fire that was able to move through the community. So comparing those two costs.
Hey, Dan, Chris here. I had a follow up on the berry stuff.
Yeah.
So Michelle, Chris Maish here in Fairbanks. So on the berry piece, it was pretty amazing how that shearbladed treatment with burning, it produced an amazing berry picking resource for this community that persists till this day. And the harvest yields are just the biggest berries you've seen, and just pretty amazing. So there's obviously a pretty big financial piece that goes with that, or even a food security piece. So it's certainly something that it would fit in the subsistence resource piece, but there's a value associated with those berries too, a fiscal value, as well as perhaps even a health value, since blueberries are pretty good antioxidants and there's a lot of good things that come from those little guys, but it's amazing what that fuel break produces in berries. And that was
Yeah.
completely unexpected. No one knew about that or thought that might happen ahead of time. And the blueberries really responded. So I'd like to know what sites you could duplicate that in and what you look for ahead of time.
Yeah. No, I think that's really cool to think about what are these sort of ecological triggers or cues that are making the blueberries so good.
I think it was the burning and the release of nutrients maybe on the site is what we're
but they're
speculating.
not necessarily as good in, naturally burned areas. There was something about.
Yeah, I think because maybe the rows, they were windrows, so the windrows got burned, but in between the windrows, it wasn't burned. And so you have this interesting juxtaposition of burned and unburned going on in that break.
Yeah, so I think that's a really cool thing. And Jen has been talking about doing surveys, social surveys of people in the uses that, or resources that they're getting out of fire breaks. But actually sampling berries is tough because you have to be there at the right time. So we do a lot of just quantitative sampling of vegetation. So we know how many Vaccinium uliginosum and Vaccinium vitis idea plants are there, but being there at the right time to do the berries from an ecological perspective is tough.
July, August. And it's quite a social thing too. You wouldn't believe it.
Use citizen scientists and
right. It's kids, family, moms and dads. It's quite a social activity.
I wonder, you can't maintain commercial blueberries without heavily pruning them. The productivity on commercial blueberries tails off if you don't prune the bushes. And so maybe it was the shearbladed effect.
Could be. I don't think we really know. Other than lots of good blueberry pancakes, muffins, and syrup have come out of that for my household.
Yeah. I wonder, you guys probably know Krista Mulder at University of Alaska Fairbanks and Katie Spellman. They've been working on some berry projects, but maybe I can get them more interested in this as well, because they've been doing a lot of community science or citizen science.
That'd be great.
All right. Thank you, everybody. Thank you to our presenters. We're coming up on 1:30. I know Michelle has somewhere to be at 1:30. I think Ed Morgan was going to give a little bit of a closing remarks for this week's state SAF meeting.
Hey, well, thanks, Dan, for putting today together. It's a great way to wrap up the week talking about fires and fuel projects and fuel breaks. So I want to thank our presenters for today, Michelle, Melissa, Darren, thanks for pinch hitting for Jeremy, and then of course Will. So yeah, appreciate your time and your presentations. And everybody, hope you enjoyed the week. I know I sure did. Started from way south in the Panhandle and worked our way north and got to see a lot of Alaska. So that was the Traverse of Alaska, forestry. And yeah, if you're in Alaska today, enjoy the rest of your day, enjoy the afternoon. And for those of you in Arizona, I guess you've got a little bit of afternoon left, but yeah, everybody take care and we'll see you soon.